Welcome to the Science to People podcast, where we make the science behind today's headlines discoverable, understandable, and actionable. I'm your host, Brinley Murphy-Reuter. Today's episode is a special one. It's the final episode of our very first season. Over the past few months, we've talked to leading scientists and academics, hearing about their insights in their own words. But if I'm honest, most people don't get their information straight from the source. They get it from social media, newsletters, influencers, YouTube videos, basically a headline and a feed. So I wanted to end this season by asking, how does an average person interpret science that we encounter all across the internet? How can you, someone trying to make smart, informed choices in your everyday life, cut through the media swirl and actually understand the science behind the noise? To help us do just that, today I'm joined by Dr. Jessica Steier. She's a public health scientist with specialized expertise in evaluating health policies and programs. She's the CEO of a data science consultancy and in 2020 launched Unbiased Science as the science communication arm of her firm. She's also the executive director of the Center for Unbiased Science and Health, a nonprofit organization that aims to improve science literacy among the general public. She aims to communicate with patience and empathy and meet people where they are, not where we expect them to be. So, want to know something cool? Recently, she ran a full campaign to reach flu vaccine skeptics on her own channels and turned that experience into a peer-reviewed study. Today, she's going to share what she's learned from talking directly to people, how she breaks down complex science for her audience, and how you can too. Dr. Jessica Steier, welcome to the Science to People podcast.
Brinley, super excited to be here. Thank you so much.
Yes, it's so great to see you. You've gotten a haircut since we last hung out. Looks amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, with everything going on, I was joking. It's either a haircut or a tattoo, and I went haircut, and we'll see what happens next.
Hey, I've got a couple of tattoos, and I feel like I always get them on a whim. I never think about them. I always get them the same day.
All right. Well, if we get together, I don't know.
If we get together, we're getting tattoos on our face or something. I feel like that's the situation, what the situation calls for.
Great.
So I'm so glad you're here today. This is our final episode of season 1 of the Science People podcast. It's been an amazing experience getting to speak with all these incredible scientists, researchers, academics, folks that do deep work that ends up in the lives of the everyday person. And then somebody like you comes in and helps the everyday person actually understand that work in a couple of different platforms that you're across and in a lot of different touch points that you have with the public. And we're doing that here with Science to People in a way, just trying to hear in these folks' own articulation of their findings. But I'm so excited to talk to you because I think you can share not only some of your own work in communicating difficult, sticky topics with the public, but also maybe help some of our listeners figure out how they can take principles that you apply to your work every day and apply it to their own lives and experiences when science kind of comes into their world in all the ways, shapes, and forms that it does. So I'm really excited to chat. With that, I'm going to start the episode as we start all of our episodes, which is the coffee shop question. We're in line at a coffee shop. It's long. I say, what do you do? How do you answer that?
This is tough because my own mother doesn't even really know what I do or how to explain it. Okay. I wear 2 hats, but I'll give you the coffee shop answer. I'm a public health scientist, so I use data to evaluate health programs and policies and see if they actually achieve what they seek to achieve. Has been my hat that I've worn for most of my life. But then in the last 5 years with COVID, I now have this new hat, which is science communicator. And this has really, it's my life's passion. And I try, as you said, to take the work of brilliant researchers and scientists and help make it accessible to the public. And I will add, and sorry, this is a long-winded coffee answer, that scientists are not, there's no form, most of us don't have formal training in communication. And, some of us may be introverts and it's not our strong suit. And we're also expert in what we're expert in. And sometimes it could be challenging to take really complex topics and make them accessible. So it's an art and a science. But then more than that, I would also say that the climate right now, these are wild times that we're living through, and with skepticism at an all-time high for certain things like vaccines, and there's a lot of chatter about food with the MAHA movement. I think that it could be very easy for scientists to sort of get angry and to double down and to maybe get frustrated if you feel like people are asking questions that are not in good faith. But I would argue that a lot of people have good questions. And so trying to take a step back and be patient and really meet people where they are is important for me. That was long. So,
No, no, but I think that actually really brings me into my first question, Wall, which is like, how do you decide what's worth talking about? People are confused about a variety of things. You covered food additives to vaccine safety, measles, ticks, like everything.
yeah.
What do you pick and choose to talk about?
This is a great question, and it's a hot topic in the SciComm world. And I will say there are some new and emerging tools like media monitoring that will allow us to like literally quantify what people are talking about, what are the buzzwords, what's trending. But I, as a data scientist, actually, my training has really served me well in pattern recognition. And so I'm sort of informally analyzing the questions that I'm receiving, comments that I see on posts. I myself am a consumer of social media, like in my own off time, my personal time, and I find it very interesting what the algorithm serves me as a mother. In particular, I think it's very interesting. We could talk a lot about that.
Oh my
And
gosh,
so,
no kidding. The productization of motherhood
my
is
gosh,
wild.
oh my gosh. And this idea that like everything we're doing is wrong and like don't
Yes.
do this, it's killing, it'll harm your child. Like it's
Yes.
just unbelievable. So yeah, so that's how I do it. But the last thing if I could just chime in and say that it's an I said it's an art and a science, because then you also have to take a step back. Like there was something, I can give a specific example, but I'll say like there are things that we might think are trending because we're in our science bubble. But then it's like, okay, do I want to address this? Am I then calling attention to misinformation that maybe the masses aren't exposed to? Is this worth
Mm,
addressing, or am I giving air to something that I shouldn't give air to? And so there's sort of a dance that we dance, and it is important to sort of step back and think like, are people worried about this enough that it's worth a response?
that's a wild decision to make because I hear that whole concept of not giving air to something that might be complete nonsense. But at the same time, if people are out there making their own sunscreen all summer, it might seem
Girl.
like nonsense, but like if it's trending and people are getting it from Instagram, podcasts, whatever, like that's shaping what they believe. So what's like your take on that, I guess?
Well, so interesting. I can give you a specific example just within the last week.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure when this is going to air, but it was so early July, I think it was, that RFK went on a podcast with Tucker Carlson and just went ham about vaccines. And he was talking, he said specifically, he put out a statistic. It was something like, oh, well, the CDC has been suppressing data. They hid data. They did a study back in 1999 that found that Hep B increased risk of autism by, it was something like 1,300%, like some absolutely astronomical number. That if I'm a mom or a parent and I'm seeing this, I'm like, oh my gosh, like I'm not to at all stigmatize autism, but to make it seem like, is the CDC suppressing some data, and
Yeah.
did I weigh all the decisions when I vaccinated my child? And I could talk all about, why that wasn't accurate and how the actual study that came out in 2003 found absolutely no link. But because I wasn't sure how many people saw that, I did this poll on my stories and I said, have you heard anything? I forget exactly how I phrased it, but I said, have you heard anything about the Hep B vaccine in the last 24 hours? Because I'm trying to figure out, I'm very transparent with my audience because I'm trying to figure out if it's worth addressing something that's come up that is misinformation. And so it was sort of like a 50-50 split, but I was inundated with hundreds of messages from people who said, I actually haven't heard it yet, but it would be super helpful if you covered it, because when I inevitably do hear it, or if it comes up in my mom group on Facebook, I have the information that I can then respond to it. So that was a really interesting thing. Like they hadn't heard it, but then there's this like army of people who do care a lot about the evidence and they want to help be messengers themselves. Like even though they don't have huge platforms, they're like, I could bring this to the mom group. I can bring this to my family holiday gathering and then, amplify the message. And I thought that was really cool.
That is interesting. Do you find that most of your audience, readers, listeners, all of the above, are those kind of individual trusted messengers that see themselves as like what was it, Dumbledore's army in Harry Potter? Like, do you do you think your folks are in that bucket? Or are they people that are somewhere on the edge of maybe disbelief of scientific claims that are looking to get the interpretation without being able to interpret it themselves? Where do your
Yeah.
audience fall?
So it's so interesting. People ask me this, and the answer is I sort of see there being three buckets of followers. And I just want to say, I absolutely love our audience so much. They're incredible. And I'm proud of the way that my team and I have created a space that people feel comfortable asking questions. So to that, I'd say about a third of our followers are that group that you just described, where maybe they're a little skeptical, maybe they have some questions and they feel, and a lot of them, by the way, have said, there are scientists who do science communication, but oftentimes, like, I feel like I can't ask questions because I'll be sort of dismissed as an anti-vaxxer or, an anti-science person. And in reality, like, they really have questions, right? So I'd say a third fall into that bucket with a sprinkling of trolls, I will say, who are not there in good faith. We could talk about that. Then a third are the general public that are science minded, and they're that Dumbledore army that you sort of described. And then the last third we have a huge healthcare professional following, HCPs, clinicians, doctors, nurses, EAs, pharmacists, and they say that they follow because they don't know how to like communicate to their patients, and not that they don't have the knowledge, but they don't know how to wrap things up in simple messages.
Yes.
And also, and something that I'd love to talk more about is, there are often different types of skepticism and different, like, I hate to say, like, groups of people who, let's say we're talking about vaccines, maybe there's one group that is, because of historical medical racism and injustices, have very valid concerns about the ingredients in vaccines, right?
Mhm.
Then there are others who are more libertarian or, who mistrust the federal government, the CDC, the FDA. And so they don't like, we try to tailor messages to those different groups. And I think HCPs find that really helpful because then when they encounter a patient or someone who comes to them with those concerns, they have the messages like wrapped up.
And that's such a great offering for the healthcare practitioners of the world, which I think is the acronym HCP.
Yes.
And so you take these complex ideas, these peer-reviewed studies that most people can't process themselves and for various reasons, including healthcare professionals, even if it's breaking news or in some hard to find journal or, hasn't been widely disseminated yet in continuing education. So you take those ideas and you make them stick. You make them translated to common language, plain language. What's your process? Like, what are the key techniques? Do you have any? Is it like analogies, data visualization that you really lean on?
Just said two big ones.
Okay.
Yeah, and it really depends on the topic. It depends on the audience and who I'm trying to reach. But I have found that data visualization is critical. And when I say data visualization, one of the I don't know, there are like logical fallacies, there are sort of themes and traps that people fall into with, I don't know, I hate to use the phrase, but mis and disinformation, where a lot of times people will put out information without proper context, or they'll say something is harmful, they don't specify the dose, or they don't put it in the context of actual exposure. And so what we
Mm.
try to do is, okay, yeah, you're saying that, I don't know, I'll give the example of Girl Scout cookies, right? There was the Moms Across America, I think it was, who put out this terrifying thing, this terrifying report about glyphosate, pesticides in Girl Scout cookies. And literally, I couldn't even believe the messages I was getting from moms saying, my daughter was accosted. We were selling cookies outside of whatever, ShopRite, and saying, you're selling poison. So anyway, so we looked at the
Okay.
actual.
First of all, sure, don't come for the Girl Scouts, but like, don't come for my cookies. Oh. I think I have like 3 boxes in my freezer. So wait, am I okay? Are we okay?
We're okay. We are
Okay.
okay because so when you actually pull the tox report that they were citing, it was so scary, like, oh, all this pesticide exposure. Okay, when you look at the numbers, you'd have to eat something like, I think it was like 9,000 boxes of Girl Scout cookies to meet the threshold. I know you're like, maybe I could hit that threshold.
I
No, no, no.
feel like that's not that many cookies, but
But so we use data visualization to drive home the quantity that you'd have to consume to even meet that baseline threshold of risk. So that helps people using real world analogies, using a little like a touch of humor. So we did this post series on raw milk, which is now all the rage, unfortunately. And, like, don't raw dog it. Like, people really appreciated that little, little spicy. I don't know, just things like that, but then it's interesting because you don't want to like try too hard because I feel like I'm a cool mom, but if I try too hard, it's obvious. And I think people really value authenticity. So it's like, you don't want to force yourself to be something you're not. So
yeah.
when I do these messages, I often, and sorry if I'm getting off topic here, but something I find really powerful. There was a great NPR piece all about connection, not correction. And the whole thing was like just sharing data, sharing facts. Like, that's not going to move the needle for the majority of people. Like there are some people who the data, like that's what they're craving. But for the majority of people, they want to like you and connect with you and trust you as a person. And so I'll often lead with my humanity and like I'm a mother, I'm a daughter, I'm a nature loving like hippy dippy scientist who makes my own oat milk and I don't know whatever, and like
Has 5 dogs.
and has 5 dogs and wants goats and and have people trust me, connect with me as a person. And I'm not going to be for everyone, right? But for those who do, like then what I'm saying goes a longer way. And I think that's something I didn't realize at first. Like when I first started doing this, it was like hit people over the head with the data and the numbers and the stats. And like again, that'll work for some, but for the large majority of people, that ain't gonna cut.
So your style has changed over the years, but
So much.
ultimately, I mean, what you're doing is such a public service. Like, how did you get into this?
So, early in the pandemic, we're starting for the first time ever, like getting interested in public health and epidemiology and biostats because they started hearing these buzzwords. And obviously, we were all terrified as a country, as the world. And people had questions and were reaching out, just like, what does this mean? I saw this headline and what do I do? So, yeah, formed Unbiased Science as a way to answer those questions. I always make the joke, and you've probably heard me say this, sorry, but like I really did think it would just be my mom and her friends, but no, it's grown and it's clear that people really do have an appetite for this. And I think you alluded to this in the beginning when we started recording, but it's like information overload right now. There are so many competing sources of information. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm proud to be a voice that I do feel strongly is grounded in evidence while not being hyper technical or judgmental, and just try to bring it to the public, bring science to the public in a way that's palatable, and like that makes sense and isn't overly complex. And ultimately to help people be better consumers of health and science information and to spot the red flags, like this is probably not great information because there is a whole lot of rubbish out there.
Yeah, and you recently, I mean, you were able to put this process that you've developed or this kind of strategy that you've developed into an academic piece of work. So you ran a kind of a informal formal study where you talked to a bunch of people to figure out why that type of person might be more hesitant to get vaccinated. I know we're talking a lot about vaccines, but it's whatever, it's everywhere. You tested different messages with those people to see what worked. And now you have published research in this area kind of show the efficacy of your approach to appealing to different types of people with the same content ultimately, but in different formats. Is that right? Can you tell me more about this work that you published?
Yeah, this was really cool. And this was a grant, an educational grant that we received. It was, just to be transparent, from CSL Seqirus, so they're flu vaccine manufacturers, but they had absolutely no hand in any of the content creation. They basically gave us this grant to do a data-driven campaign on flu vaccines. And so we did a survey, we did focus groups, and we were trying to identify, first of all, who are the groups of people who are the most likely, as you said, who are less likely to get a flu vaccine. And there were two groups that emerged early on. They were Black Americans, regardless of age, sex, or location in the US. And then they were young white men living primarily in the Midwest and rural parts of America in the South. And so I did these focus groups with them. And I got to tell you, the focus groups with the Black participants, I left crying because they were asking questions in the focus groups and bringing things up. Like, I heard there's formaldehyde, or I heard that it can give me the flu, the flu vaccine. And I was answering their questions, and they were getting so emotional. They were like, no one has ever taken the time to answer these specific questions for me. And actually, 100% of those focus group participants left saying that they had changed their perspective on the flu vaccines. It was
Wow, just from
unbelievably
having a
powerful.
conversation.
Just from feeling heard and
Just from feeling
listened to.
heard.
That was the big thing. And
Wow.
so,
Isn't
yeah,
that what we
anyway.
all need, Jess? Like, we all just need to feel heard. I've been listening to stuff about my toddler's tantrums, and it's the same thing.
Yep.
Tell
They
him
just want to be all heard.
you hear what he's feeling.
Well, and that's the big thing, and not to poop on scientists, because scientists are freaking incredible, but I think a lot of times we expect people to feel a certain way, right? But we fail to recognize that we're all products of the environment that we grew up in and the information that we're exposed to. And some people, like, we, as much as I fight the echo chamber, as much, that's my whole thing, is I want to break out of echo chambers. The algorithm is algorithming, and I know I am still in my little bubble. And so my whole thing is, like, we have to meet people where they are and not where we expect them to be. And, like, the mom who doesn't vaccinate her child thinks she's making the right decision for her child. But we have to try to be patient as much as possible and realize that a good number of these people, like, they're victims of the environments that they're exposed to.
Yeah.
And so really, like, checking myself when I'm getting frustrated, it's like,
Yeah.
well, hold on before you jump to conclusions and think that this person is just trolling you. Maybe they're not.
Yeah. Well, and I guess on that note, like, let's say I'm just scrolling through social media and I'm somehow out of my echo chamber and I see something that's this bold claim, or even not so bold of a claim. Like, we had somebody on recently who did the study on microplastics and nanoplastics. They were comparing the amount of nanoplastics in the average human brain to the amount of a plastic spoon. And, like, that's a bold claim and very visceral, right? And so I'm curious, like, now that I've talked to him, I know where that visceral visual came from. I know why they put it out there, that, is published in the New York Times. I understand how his studies work, how his information, his research is done, and I really respect it. And I'm curious though, like, so somebody comes across that and they haven't talked to Dr. Marcus Garcia from the University of New Mexico. What's something that they can do in the moment to tell whether that information or that claim is legit or, like, totally off?
Man, it's tricky, and that's a really great example with the microplastics, because I'm seeing that everywhere. And I'm not sure what your conversation was with Dr. Garcia, but listening to that, first of all, if I saw something that said microplastics riddling our brains, right, whatever the headlines are, if something is causing a really, like, a visceral emotional reaction, but typically if something is posed that way, it should give you pause, and it's like, why does this want me to have this really strong reaction, right?
Yeah.
Two is context. So again, using that microplastic example, if you actually, and this is outside of my specific training, but I've spoken to some people who are expert, toxicologists and others, and they've said, well, actually the methodology, the testing that we do, the brain is like a sponge and it retains the microplastics. So sometimes it's sort of like an artifact of the test itself. And it can sound scarier than the reality, right?
Yeah.
So context, and then also you can say that that's the case, but then what evidence do we have that that's doing something to our health? So let's see something to its logical conclusion. Okay, you're telling me, for example, the glyphosate in Girl Scout cookies. Of course, they left out the context, right? The dose. Do we have evidence that those things are harming our health in the
Mhm.
quantities at which they're present? So when there's like missing gaps or they're scaring you with something, but then they're not sharing evidence of what this actually means. Another big thing is if they're only citing preclinical animal studies. That's a very big thing for like food dyes. People will say, oh, well, we have data that it causes cancer. Hold on. We have rat data that show that maybe it increases the risk when rats are exposed to like thousands of times the amount of food dye that we would ever be exposed to as humans.
Right.
So like having people understand that not all research is created equal, and animal data is super valuable, but we can't just assume that what's found in a rat is going to translate to humans, right?
Right.
So that's really important. Always looking for when they don't specify dosage, because the dose makes the poison. I say that till I'm blue in the face. Like with the glyphosate, okay, you're saying it's present in what quantities? At
Right.
what quantities do we know this might cause harm? So I don't know if that's helpful, but those are some of the red flags I look for.
That is. So we're looking for like extreme claim or like extreme presentation, like,
Yes,
all of that, right? We're looking for context. So is the dose missing? Is the kind of delivery volume missing? And then we're looking for the so what. So
exactly.
okay, so there's glyphosate in Girl Scout cookies. It's an extreme claim. We don't know how much they're talking about. And so what? So, okay, so those are like the three main things. And then like the secondary things are like, is it in rats? Is it in, an animal study? And
Yeah.
does that just add another layer of like, I'm gonna do my own digging?
Totally. And two other things, real quick, is if it's a very black and white statement, I always say science is gray. Like I know everyone likes a sexy, like black and white statement. This will kill you. This will extend your life. The reality is so nuanced. And there's not a singular, very rarely, is there like a singular cause that we can point to,
Mm,
right? And it's not so absolute. It's like, okay, this could raise
yeah.
your risk if you also do these things, like also if you have genetic predisposition. Like there are just so many caveats. And when I get into the weeds, like people, you could see their eyes kind of glaze over because it's like, well,
Yeah.
that's not, what do I do with that information? And when they get this information, like, throw out your black plastic utensils, your kitchen utensils, it's like, okay, that's something actionable. People feel empowered. They could do something. But like, I'm not running out and throwing out my black kitchen utensils. When they are worn out, I will, probably replace them with silicone or wood. And, I do try to, I don't heat up my plastic, whatever. Like there are certain things you could do, but this panic response is
Yeah.
often unwarranted. And then the last thing, I'm so sorry, Brinley, is, can you tell I get passionate about this? Is this idea like something is going against like the overwhelming scientific consensus. And
Hmm.
there's a group of people who are very susceptible to that, the hidden truth, right?
Okay.
Who feel like they're being let into a secret. And it's like, well, they're not telling us this.
Right.
There is a claim, and there is sometimes emerging research that does sort of adjust our fundamental knowledge of something. It's very, very rare that that occurs, and usually it's more gradual. So a very big red flag is if it's like something that completely contradicts the scientific consensus on a topic. The
Mm.
reality is that's really unlikely to happen. There's usually teams of researchers and scientists working on topics, and so it's highly unlikely that there'd be something that totally 180 shifts our thinking on things.
Right. And I guess though, like, can you blame the public for that kind
No.
of thinking because that science has truths? Because for so long, science has told us that science has truth. Science has told us that this is the answer. You get a flu shot, you do that. Like for so long, we've been told that science has the answer and is the truth. So I can't really blame people.
You're
And then
so
sometimes
right.
the sources that they trust don't say the same thing. What advice might you have for somebody who's trying to make sense of kind of these conflicting claims, especially in the health and wellness space? Because like I hear, which is, I'm fine with the nuance, like keep your black plastic utensils until they wear out and then replace them with something healthier. But then maybe I'm sitting there thinking every time I use my black plastic utensils, am I just like micro dosing microplastics into my body?
Right.
And like I get that, I don't want to waste things and just consume,
Yeah.
but like it's so tough.
It is so tough. And again, throwing in the fact that we're moms and parents, like that adds another layer. And I feel like it makes us extra susceptible to that sort of messaging because I would cut my arm off for my kids. I know you would do the same, right? So it's tough. And there's so much anxiety now. And I think like the times have changed so much with social media and even COVID, even just messaging about vaccines. We used to say vaccines are safe and effective, right? Now with COVID, people are accessing PubMed who have no background in science and they're accessing medical literature and scientific literature. And maybe they don't have the training to really understand what these things mean. And so, like, now the bar has been raised. I have people asking me, well, where are the double blinded placebo controlled trials? Like, these are people with no scientific background. So, it's really changed the way that science has to be communicated. My advice to people is there are very few things that if we do them in moderation or occasionally are going to have any major impact on our health, with some notable exceptions like smoking cigarettes. We know, even smoking a small amount will impact our health. But like this idea that everything we're doing is killing us, it's just not accurate. And like we take on risk every single time we step out of bed in the morning. And that's just the truth of the matter. And so if you're following people on social media who are scaring the crap out of you, maybe reconsider following them because that's just not the reality of the way that risk works. I know it's a lot less sexy to follow people who share the nuance with you, but we share the nuance with you because we know that you can handle the nuance and we trust you to handle the nuance. And so, yeah, it's just a shift in the way that you think, but don't get sucked into this idea that you're doing all these terrible things to yourself and your kids. Yeah, that's not reality.
I think that that's great advice to like see what the person is trying to relay to you. Is it extreme? Is it scary? Is it a sales pitch? And then make your decisions from there after you've kind of investigated the intention. There's a
Yeah.
lot of well meaning folks out there. But I think at the end of the day, what I'm hearing you say is similar to what a guest that we had on a couple weeks ago said. She is a editor at a major publication. She said, academic information was never meant to be shared with the public when it was published. It's a continuing conversation between academics. And so I hear you echoing that. And this is adding to a broader story that I think we've created throughout this season, which is like, let's give the public science. I mean, obviously, this nonprofit is called Science to People. I think that science needs to get to people in much more accessible ways than it ever has before. But at the same time, I'm really learning and I've been humbled to realize that there's some science that's just not meant for public consumption. And so perhaps we do need these information,
Stewards,
shepherds,
shepherds, stewards, right?
steward shepherds such as yourself to bring us along on these journeys through academic concepts. But with that all said, I want to end with a question on advice for science curious folks or folks that aren't just going to take hook, line, and sinker what MSNBC says about the measles or what Fox News says about the measles or what an influencer they follow says about plastic cutting boards. So for somebody who wants to stay curious and not get misled, both things, what's one mindset or habit that you'd recommend they carry into their media ocean?
Don't just accept information blindly. Like sometimes it is more obvious when information, like when someone's selling you something. To me, I look at these ads that I get when I open up my TikTok where it's like, here, take a test. Everyone's deficient in vitamin D and whatever it is, right? Oh, and PS, here's a supplement that you could take, when they're creating the problem and then literally selling you the cure. Like sometimes
Yeah.
it's really, really obvious. Sometimes it's less obvious. And I think people don't realize that, social media is a way for, it's a livelihood for a lot of people. Like wellness influencers rack in the dough just from, having a certain number of followers. And how do you get that? When you have clickbaity messages that make people, that capture attention and get likes and get shares, just to be aware of the information ecosystem. And that being said, there are some really good players out there who care. And you don't get into science or public health. I mean, I can't speak for every single person. Of course, there are bad players in every field, but for the money or to, like, we get into this because we care. And I think that that's important, like to try to suss out those people and follow your gut.
Yeah.
Like there is something, I don't know, probably scientists are cringing for when I say that, but like sometimes I get the ick when I like listen to people and I'm like, this feels sensational or a little clickbaity. Like listen to that voice.
Yeah.
And I don't know, eventually like try to find, like, obviously I'd be honored if you followed Unbiased Science, but there are so many amazing science communicators, and follow those people and fight the algorithm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And just really honestly, Brinley, just want to say thank you for the work that you're doing to help science communicators do our work more effectively and efficiently and accurately. It's so important, and I'm really excited and proud of you for what you're doing. It's just an honor to be here.
Thank you. It's the honor of a lifetime getting to serve you all. So thank you so much for your time, Dr. Steier. As always, it's amazing chatting with you. And I really think that our listeners will have taken a lot back from our conversation today. And hopefully at the end of this season, they can come into the rest of their time with a more thoughtful approach to the information that they encounter on the interwebs every day. So
I hope so. Thank you so much.
Dr. Steier, thank you so much for helping me close out our first season with exactly the kind of clarity and curiosity all of us have been aiming for. To everyone listening, this whole season has been about giving you a peek behind the curtain of how science works from the people who actually do the sciencing. But we know that's not how most people encounter science. You find it through someone else's take, a reel, a tweet, a blog, a Netflix documentary. So today's episode was our way of handing the mic to someone who's in that swirl every day, translating research, fielding questions, helping people make decisions rooted in evidence, not fear or noise. We hope you're walking away with a few tools to spot the signal in the static and the confidence to trust your instincts when it comes to evidence-based information. Definitely follow Dr. Jessica Steier at Unbiased Science. And if you'd enjoyed this season, please take a moment to subscribe, leave a review, and share with someone who's ever asked, how do I know what to believe? Or what about that plastic spoon in my brain? We'll be back soon with season 2. In the meantime, you can find more of our work at sciencetopeople.org or on our Substack, sciencetopeople.substack.com. Thank you so much for listening.